Good morning, and here we go. Continuing with the Renaissance. Hope you guys are having a great day. We're going to move on to the High Renaissance. This is the art piece. This is the people who make this what it is. And then we're also going to end talking about how it leaves Italy and goes north. All right, so that's what we're going to do today. Don't worry about the slides. A lot of them are just pictures because, like I said, art. So here we go. So we're going to talk about what it means to be a Renaissance man. It's a term we use today, and so this should not be too difficult. A Renaissance man knows a lot about a lot of things. You learn more than just how to farm. You can read, you can appreciate art, you understand politics, maybe a little, science. And today, a Renaissance man would know different things, but he would know a wide array of different things. It wouldn't be just the same thing all the time. We wouldn't just know one thing. All right, so but he will know something about something really well. So that's kind of different. Like a Renaissance man would know art really well. He would know painting really, really well, but he would also know other things, and that's what sets them apart from other people during this time period. Is the not so much the amount of knowledge in one area, which would be substantial, but all the other stuff he knows is what sets them apart. And more likely than not, it's going to be a man. Hence the name Renaissance man. Sorry. And they're able to connect these different schools of thought, science and art, or politics and geography or whatever, and come up with a new concept. So they're sort of the first deep thinkers since the Greek philosophers, really. Again, and this makes sense because the Renaissance was hearkening to a time gone by, the time of Roman greatness and grandness and Greek thinking. And so it makes sense that these guys wanted to model, emulate, copy that way of thinking. And like I just alluded, ancient Renaissance men were Plato, Aristotle. They were the big thinkers. Remember, their thinking got them killed. Excuse me, because when you think, you begin to question, and when you question, sometimes governments don't like being questioned. During the Renaissance period, these gentlemen are the foremost ones, and then it's also important to note that these are early Southern Italian. These are the Italian Renaissance people, because there are going to be people in the northern part of Europe and in England who also would be considered Renaissance men. But people like Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, three of the four turtles, Petrarch, Erasmus, and then Mirandola. Pico della Mirandola, nice Italian name. These were some of the quintessential, these are the OG Renaissance men. And why were there so many Renaissance men during the Renaissance? Well, those two bottom notes are very, very important. One, if you were an artist, you didn't have to just be an artist. If you were a philosopher, you didn't have to just be a philosopher. There were no ink borders that determined what you could and could not know. And that was kind of a cool thing. And that ties in with the whole concept that we spoke of last time of humanism, and the idea that as a human being, I have value and I can learn all kinds of things, because if I'm God's creation, why not? And then the other thing, one of my favorite things, knowledge was just knowledge. There's nothing wrong with knowing stuff. I think I try and impart that and kind of let my students know that, or let anybody I come in contact with know that knowing stuff just to know stuff, there's nothing wrong with that. You can never know too much stuff. Let me get myself out of the way. Okay. You can never know too much stuff. That's Mr. Stowry's creed. Just learn stuff to learn it. Win Jeopardy. All right, moving on. Here's our first great guy, Leonardo da Vinci. It's also important to note, don't memorize the dates, but um, just kind of notice the dates, because the Renaissance happened over a couple hundred years. Like, it was a pretty broad thing. Like, the Renaissance lasted almost as long as we've been a country. So very few of these people, well, not all these people, knew each other. They knew of their work, but not necessarily occupied time at the same time. So here's Da Vinci. And I'm going to get out of the way for this. Okay. During Leonardo's time, this was the life in the country and the time he was living in. Like I said last time, Leonardo comes around. A lot of these guys come around at a time where you could make money doing this. There was profit. There was also, because there was profit, there was competition. So there were rivalries between artists, whether they be super, super famous or local. There was a rivalry because you wanted to get that patron, that wealthy man or wealthy family, to support you. So there was, there was competition. There was scientific curiosity. Again, what we're going to see during this time period is the blending of science into art, especially when we look at how people during the Renaissance were painted and portrayed and sculpted, compared with during the ancient period, and the style of of paint and of art in themselves. And then the last thing is a civic duty. They felt it their responsibility to provide beauty and art and grandeur, because a lot of these artists built buildings, were designed structures. So there were all sorts of ramifications and important factors in what they did. So these were the motivations, and this was the type of environment that these guys were working in the 13, 14, and early 1500s. All right, excuse me. Now, this is a painting of, let me move again. This is a painting, whoops, let's go back. You know that painting. This is The Last Supper. This is painted by Da Vinci. This is, he used a new method. He built it into the room. So notice that one of the new art techniques is the idea of perspective. Those of you who've taken any kind of art one or basic art class, one of the first things you do, one of the things you do in that class is learn about the idea of perspective, of foreground and afterground. Notice how this painting looks like it is built, and like you can actually, it looks like they're actually placed in the back of the building. Like, it look like there's depth of field, there's space behind Jesus and the disciples going back to those windows. There's light coming in from the windows being used. There's a door cut. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are different from a style standpoint in this painting that didn't exist um, in the more ancient times of Rome and Greece. So perspective is one of the big things that comes out of this time period from art. Just ask an art teacher; they'll tell you. His most famous painting, arguably, is the Mona Lisa. What's so great about it? I don't. It's art, lighting, perspective, nature, and humanism. She looks very human. She looks to be behind a backdrop and not part of the backdrop. The lighting and the shadow and the way it falls on her is different. And of course, when you move around the room, her eyes follow you. But the last part, the part here of humanism, not working today. Of humanism is important because there is that quality about her, like her humanness. And I'm not an art critic, but just sitting here looking at it, the humanness of her is evident. It's not, she doesn't have the halo over her head or the gold ring over her head. She's not made in some idealized physical form. But there's no doubting that she is a woman, and there's no doubting that she is human, and that's kind of a cool thing. Leonardo da Vinci also was very interested in anatomy, wrote some of the earliest anatomical books. That picture, if you've ever seen it before, now you know who drew it. He was also very, very particular about his information. So as you can see, you had to read his books, his notebooks in a mirror because he wrote in the opposite direction. He also used the idea of science and bodies and the anatomy in his art, and lots of Renaissance artists did this. So that's why the subjects in their paintings and in their sculptures tend to look a bit more authentic and a bit more real. He also was an avid inventor. He came up with rudimentary crossbows, a multi-barrel cannon, one of the first tanks, or the idea of one of the first tanks was a Leonardo sort of creation in one of his notebooks. That's kind of cool. And he also dabbled in flight and the concept of early flying machines with like wings and what looks like here an early helicopter. But again, the concept of flight, because remember, during this time period, nothing was off limits. Thinking for the sake, remember, knowledge for the sake of knowledge, thinking for the sake of thinking. Why not do this? It was, why not would be a pretty cool sort of slogan for the Renaissance back then, because why not? And again, as I stated just a second ago, he actually studied corpses, and he was probably not alone in this, to get a better understanding of how the body worked, and what it looked like and what was going on in there. Because prior to real science and anatomy and studying physiology and autopsy work, there was a lot of superstition in and a lot of guesswork in what was going on in there, what caused illness, and all the other physical things that go on in men and women. A lot of it was guesswork or divine or punishment. So this journey into actually looking at a body from a scientific standpoint, from a purely observational standpoint, is going to go a long way. If you think about what this allows to happen further down the road with like real medicine and real surgeries and things like that, eventually, I mean, this is a pretty big deal. Again, I don't know how he got this picture or why, but he also looked at women. And it's fascinating to me that wanting to know how this work mattered. I mean, that's the biggest takeaway of all this. Not that, look at the drawings and the detail and the pencil, but just the fact that during the Middle Ages, so much of the thinking was tied to, this is what the church says. This is what the church says. So you're going to have to do what the church says, to now this idea of, look, we prayed and we still died in the plague, and we prayed and this still happened and this still happened. And I believe there's a God, but I have questions that the church wasn't able to answer. And for some people, they left and did their own thing. But for most people, it was really just to try and figure out how to make sense of all this coming out after the plague. So they're not throwing God. I can't speak to what Da Vinci thought about religion, but broadly speaking, for all the people, they're not throwing it away. They're just trying to understand their relationship with God and God in the world better. Remember, I said this the last time we met, that the Renaissance it begins as a religious thing to have a richer, fuller, more deeper relationship with God by understanding more of what He wants from us and how things work. So technology, machines, hydraulics, vehicles, the idea of architecture, the scientific method is a byproduct of this time. I can't live without that, because that's going to move us all forward, especially when we get to the Enlightenment. But all these changes come about during this time period and through a lot of these men. And then this is just taking that one step further, and the idea, especially of the scientific method, that without experiment, it's just people thinking with vanity, with look at what I've done. But if you can experiment with it, if you can prove it, because remember, it's not science unless you can do it over and over and over and get the same result. So what Leonardo is saying is that once you can do that, that is certainty, that is science, and that is when it really matters. So this whole idea of being able to prove it, not just saying because God wills it, or because the Pope says so, or because my king or my Lord says so, but proving it is science. Now, Leonardo's legacy. I don't want to cover Leonardo's face. He worked hard to draw his own portrait. All right. Whoops. He only painted 17 paintings. He had notebooks and drawings, and he figured out how to divert rivers to prevent flooding. It's amazing. The principles of the turbine, cartography, which is map making, and something that means a whole lot to me. Look at that right there, right there. The submarine, that's so cool. The parachute, the flying machine, which is eventually going to be the airplane. I mean, all of that is wicked awesome. And then there are other things as well. Excuse me while I let my son get online and do some work. All right. Our next person is Michelangelo. And did you know he had a last name? There it is, Buonarroti. Michelangelo is the next person that we're going to discuss. Born outside of Florence, not South Carolina, but Florence, Italy. He was an apprentice sculptor. So he actually, remember we talked about, that was one of the things you could do. You could be an apprentice sculptor. And he learned how to sculpt. His master, whoever it was, recognized the talent he had, and he was on his way. So this is Michelangelo. He lived in the Medici Palace. Remember, that was one of the families, the wealthy merchant families of Italy. So they were his patron. They sponsored him and paid for his art. He studied anatomy as well. I mean, again, the one thing that's always amazed me about sculpture is how you can stare at a rock and see this right here inside a rock. Like, how do you know that is there? That is amazing to me. It's always been amazing to me. But again, it's through study and I guess through practice. And because if you think about it, if you mess up on a rock, you can't delete and start over. You can't reboot. There's none of that stuff. So you got to get it right, or have a very patient patron who's okay with you going and getting another stone to start on. He created several pieces for the Medici's tomb and other places. So again, he was commissioned. This is his most famous work. This is the Pietà. The Pietà is a statue of Mary and Jesus. And this is his most famous work. And this is Mary holding her dead son. And just take a second and look at it. And it's an amazing, amazing, amazing piece of work. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. And again, to sit there, I mean, look at the, I don't know if it's going to come up in later slides, but look at the detail in the hands. And you can actually see emotion in her face. I mean, it's a beautiful, and the way the clothes wrinkle and fall and everything. It's just a really, really beautiful piece of art. If you have an opportunity in your town where you live, my students or any student, if you have an art museum, go walk around. Just go look at the work that these people do, and take a second to appreciate the skill and the beauty, and how, even though it's stone, the life in that work. He was also commissioned to sculpt David, the king of Israel, David. And again, no, the physique. One of the things that David's most known for, and it should be in the next slide, are the hands. And the hands are just so. Yeah, and the hands are just. I mean, the veins and the nails and the knuckles, and when you look at the eyes and the face and the way the hair moves, I mean, this is amazing stuff out of stone. So again, the attention to detail, the importance of knowing anatomy, is it can't be understated, and it's just an amazing thing when you consider this is also done by hand, hammer and chisel, and other things 500 years ago. Pretty cool. He worked on the tomb of Julius Caesar, and then he also worked on the Sistine Chapel. Whoops, let's go back. And so this here is the roof. This is the roof of the Sistine Chapel, and he painted all that. And he painted all the walls, and he painted it on his back on a scaffold. It was very hard. It was very, very difficult for him. And one of the most famous parts of the Sistine Chapel, it's right here, and right here is God and Adam, right there. So, I mean, again, the detail in the body, the detail in all of it, it's just amazing to me that this was all done by hand and painted over time. And it's trust me, I have not seen it, but to me, it's worth a ticket to Italy just to go see that. That's absolutely stunning that this was done by one person, and absolutely beautiful. Excuse me. No sneeze. Okay. And again, this is just another view of the chapel from the floor, and then there's God and David and Adam again. And then there's being kicked from the Garden of Eden, and there's all sorts of scenes. Because remember, a lot of these paintings, like stained glass windows in churches were used to tell stories about the Bible, different parts of the Bible. One, because they're pretty and they're beautiful because the light comes in them, but two, because most people back then weren't reading. It's a way for them to know the story without text. And again, this is still the Sistine Chapel. It's amazing. All right, I'm going through these, but you'll have this online. You can take a chance and just look at the different characters. He also sculpted Moses. He did this for Pope Leo X, the sculpture of Moses. That's also pretty cool. And he was the architect for St. Peter's Basilica, this church right here in the Vatican. And then just for perspective's sake, over here to the left shows you the height of a bunch of different structures: the Pantheon in Rome, the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, which is a church, the Superdome in New Orleans, St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Been there, went to an Easter service there. That's a long story. And then finally, St. Peter's in Rome. Again, over 400 feet high, and to be built 500 years before the Superdome is incredible to me. But again, the Romans knew architecture and arches and domes and supports. The Greeks understood geometry. You take all that together, as long as you have math and materials, you can build things. So there you go. Our next one is Raphael. He was born in Urbino, Italy. He was a quick learner, hard worker. He borrowed techniques from other artists. He often sketched women and children. He is the architect for St. Peter's. My apologies. And he died at 37, unfortunately. And he's buried in the Pantheon, which is kind of cool, in Rome. But he only lived 37 years, which isn't bad back then. But for your legacy to be St. Peter's, that's pretty amazing, because that's an amazing cathedral. It's good enough for a pope. This painting, the School of Athens, comes out during this time, and this is an interesting painting because all the people in this painting, this is Athens as in Greece, as in during the classical period, the ancient period, and this is a Renaissance painting of all the important thinkers and great people in Greece at that time. If it'd be easier to go back and forth in a room, but we can't, so let's just talk about it. And again, I mean, Apollo, Alexander, let's see, Socrates is in there, Plato, Aristotle, Raphael, Ptolemy, Euclid. I mean, all the great people, whether it be Pythagoras is in there, Epicurus. So whether it be thinkers or philosophers or mathematicians or even some of the ancient gods, like right there, there's Apollo, number one. 4 and 5 are Plato and Aristotle, because that's how they see it. And then there's Socrates is number 3. They think it could be Alexander at number 2. So all the great people who I guess they feel are responsible for this movement, for the grandeur that is the Renaissance, is because of this time period. And so they made a painting to sort of commemorate or recognize the people who they deem responsible and who are sort of the foundation and the forerunners of this time period. All right, any questions? No? Remember, send them to the discussion where the notes are, and I'll answer them for you on Fridays. That's sort of what I want to do now, is every Friday answer questions. So here we go. The Madonna of the Meadow. The Madonna. Madonna is Mary, and the Madonna is probably one of the most painted things of the Renaissance. Paintings of the Madonna are everywhere, and so this is one of those paintings. Now, Raphael was, if you want a textbook definition of a Renaissance man, here you go. He was an artist. He was an archaeologist, believe it or not, a writer, a philosopher, a teacher. He was an architect because we just learned that he helped build St. Peter's Basilica. So this is what it meant to be a Renaissance man, to have a range of knowledge in many different things, and that's really, really cool. All right, moving on. And there they are. The only guy not there, Donatello. I don't know who Donatello is. All right. Now, there were also writers during this time period. And again, we talked about this earlier last week or the other day, that the two biggest things that affect the ability to write is, one, the vernacular, which is their native languages that allow people to get their words to more people, which you would want to do if you're a writer. And two, that lovely, lovely invention, the most important invention in the history of mankind, the printing press. But we have writers now too, because writing is art. Literature is art. It is. Things aren't just in Greek and Latin anymore. They're in all native languages, which is a big change. Italian, German, English, and French, others as well. But these are, these are the languages of the people. These are the languages of the folks who are probably that you want to buy your books or your writings or your pamphlets. The reason they wrote is different. They wrote for self-expression. Okay, they wrote to tell stories, and those stories talked about the individuality of people, or events and commentaries, or maybe criticisms about events. But the big change is that the people's lives and what's going on with the people and the struggle of the protagonist and the antagonist and the people in the book matters to the writer. And that's a big change. They're not trying to necessarily make every book a moral or teach a lesson. It's much more about the human experience, which ties in with the whole idea of humanism and human thought. Okay? All right. And yes, we still do it today. One of the first writers is Dante. Dante is Italian. He wrote the Divine Comedy. There it is. Now, notice one thing I want you to start paying attention to, that this is a painting of Dante right here. And remember, the Renaissance begins in Italy. So notice the colors in this, notice the style in this. And when we get to the Northern Renaissance, see if you can pick up on the difference. All right. And maybe why that difference exists. Renaissance writers. Dante was a poet. He was a theorist, a philosopher, a political thinker, born in Florence. Some people refer to him as the father of the Italian language. He wrote the Divine Comedy, which is an epic poem about Dante traveling through hell, through purgatory, and through heaven. And it's broken up into three parts: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. So there you go: hell, purgatory, and paradise. And it's the story of this journey, which is pretty, outside the box, and I don't know, for that time period. But why not talk about going through hell? Why not talk about purgatory? Why not make it something that isn't in Latin, or you're told here's what you need to know? So kind of risky, but kind of why not? The next person is Petrarch. I didn't dress him. Don't. All right. Okay. And Petrarch, here it is. Sometimes called the father of humanism. So sometimes some people give him the credit for beginning this whole concept of humanism. He wrote in Italian and Latin. He wrote sonnets, and a sonnet is a 14-line poem. He wrote sonnets about a mysterious woman named Laura. Now, sonnets, when I think of sonnets, I don't think of Petrarch. When I think of sonnets, I think of Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote some pretty amazing sonnets. But now you know who wrote them first. Little is known of Laura. Other than she died in the plague in 1348. So what he's writing are these lamentations, these poems, these beautiful sonnets about someone who he I guess, meant something to him and has died and is gone forever. So how does one get to be the father of humanism? Oh, let me move me again. Well, here's how Petrarch did it, and I'll come back in a second. He took classical philosophy and he put it in a Christian framework. Okay, so look, that's kind of important. He did not say, look, there's no church, because remember, this is all about God. Okay, and he did it for a couple of reasons. One, so that the church would be okay with it. Okay, and then down here, his basic idea was that the study of mankind as such was a viable and important field for Christian people, thus laying the groundwork for later Renaissance figures. So in other words, if we are to understand God better, we need to understand us better. That man is the center of all things. If remember, God blew life into Adam, or however, I don't know how it goes exactly. So please. But if we are God's creation, then we need to understand us to better understand God. And we need to understand us to better understand the world around us and then make it better and everything else. So he sees this as an opportunity, or maybe a necessity, to reconcile both things, like not to throw one out for the other, that they can work together, that to truly understand one, you need to understand the other. And this way of looking at it and embedding it or incorporating it and making it part of Christianity is going to keep the church off his back, which you're going to want to do, because even though they took a couple of hits with the Crusades and the plague, it's still the church. And remember, there are more people who are poor than aren't, and there are more people who are concerned with tomorrow than the greatness of man. So it needs to, you got to find that balance between both. All right. Our next guy is Boccaccio. There he is, the guy from the Fleas on Rats video. The book by Boccaccio. This is him. He wrote a book called The Decameron. And this is kind of cool, because, let me go back. Because you may not know this, some of you may, and you will learn about this in the 12th grade in our schools, or when sometime in your high school life, I hope. This is a book that, now that I've actually done some stuff, I'm going to go read this because this seems like it's a very interesting book. But he writes the Decameron, and he writes it about, move me again. I'm moving all over the place. He wrote the Decameron, whoops, and it takes place during the plague in Italy. And it's about 10 people, 7 women and 3 men who hide. Look, it's like now they're quarantined, they can't leave. And they had to figure out now, of course, there's 10 of them, so they're violating group size laws now, but they're hiding out in a villa during the plague to try and survive the plague, and they're telling different stories each night. And it's just a recap of those stories. They're very realistic and sometimes off-colored stories, so they're a little racy, a little spicy. But they cover, as the last note tells us, they cover various facets of life. They're tragic, they're funny, they're comedic, they're a little racy and saucy for that time period. You have to remember too, when you see something here like this being off-colored or inappropriate or scandalous, remember the times and what it means at that time to be scandalous by today or 100 years ago or whatever. But it's just people trying to survive and pass the time when you can't go outside. Go write some stories, pass the time, share them with your friends. It's also how we got later on, a couple hundred years later, in the not too distant past, how we got Frankenstein and Dracula. They were all sitting together and they had a competition. There was one other book too, and I can't remember it, and I apologize. And Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula, and Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, and the other person, sorry to the other person, tried to come up with a competition to see who could write the scariest story. And that's how those books came about. All right. Now, 2 other writers, and these are Northern Renaissance writers, so we'll talk about these people just so briefly. Guy to the left, Bill Shakespeare. Guy to the right, Thomas More. Both English. Both writers. Shakespeare wrote sonnets. Well, also remember too that the Renaissance moves, and we'll get to this in just a minute. The Renaissance moves north. So the ideas of the artists, of the writers, of the thinkers, all those things begin to move north. So the idea of the sonnet, now I don't know if a sonnet was truly an Italian thing. Maybe other parts of Europe and other parts of the world were writing 14-line poems. But Shakespeare wrote some excellent poems. Thomas More wrote a book called Utopia, which is not, it was more satirical. So these writers, benefit from other things, but they put spins from other parts of the world and from where they live. Okay. And again, writing in their vernacular, Thomas More and William Shakespeare. Shakespeare is credited with adding 2,000 words to the English language. That's pretty cool. All right. So Renaissance writers wrote in the vernacular about people and life rather than about God, and set many trends that are still used by writers today. They're not arguing there is no God, but the focus of the writing is about humanity and man's struggles, maybe to reconcile God, as in Dante's Inferno, or maybe to deal with death, as in the sonnets, or maybe how to pass the time and how to survive or to deal with plague or COVID-19, or how to talk about the government, as in Thomas More and Shakespeare, who writes some pretty interesting takes, because Shakespeare writes comedy. He writes comedies, which I think are his best work. He writes tragedies that everybody knows and you read in high school, and he even writes some histories. He wrote history. He wrote Julius Caesar and others, and he wrote poems. And then there are those who say he didn't write any of it, but that's a topic for another day. So we've had artists, we've had architects, we've had inventors, we've had writers, all during the Renaissance. Now we're going to take it and we're going to move it north. Here we go. All right. Well, let's go back a second. So this is Europe, 1648. This is Europe at the end of the Renaissance. This is Europe as the Enlightenment is dawning upon us. Okay, notice how large the Venetian Republic. This is Italy here. There's the Ottoman Empire here. They're German states. It is not Germany as a country yet. Look at how large Poland is. I mean, France kind of looks like France. England, Scotland, and Ireland are they're kind of all set except look at that over there. That purple, that's part of England. I mean, it's obviously the geography looks like Europe, but some of the borders are starting to take shape. It's not going to be fully Europe until the Europe from the maps until like 1918. So here we go. Oh, notice, see all these, each one of those areas, each one of those little circles, those little borders, those are all different little German states. All right. And then the whole red line there, the other red line is the Holy Roman Empire. The Northern Renaissance. Thank you, Mr. McKinley. All right, here we go. In the 1400s, here's Italy, what is now Italy. There's what is now France. There's Spain. There's Germany-ish land. There's England. These are the big places, not the only places, but these are the places that get talked about the most during the Renaissance and during the Reformation, which we'll get to beginning Monday. All right, or our next meeting, I guess. So, let me move me again. Started in the late 1400s. All right, moving on. The Renaissance began to spread to the rest of Europe in places like Belgium, here, and England, which is here, and France, and Spain. Okay, so that's where it starts to move, and then up to other places later. So starts to move north through a vocabulary term from way back when, through a concept that we all know and love. Anybody? No? Okay, let's see. What does that say? All right, let's back up for a second. How did this happen, you ask? How did this happen, you ask? Well, let's look. Here we go. Now, a copy is never as good as the original. Cookie Monster cupcakes, not so much. Minion cake, not so much. All right, so a renaissance is coming. A renaissance is coming. It is, I promise, it is. Most people like the idea of a new awesome sauce culture, idea of ancient Greece and Rome, but there was one problem. Well, there's one big problem in making it look like the Italian Renaissance. Remember, this is Belgium, eventually the Netherlands, it's Spain, it's France, it's England. It is not Italy. It is not Rome. It is not Greece. But they like the ideas. But there are going to be some things that make it difficult. Think about it. Go back to here. Look, without me saying too much, because we're going to talk about it in a second, what are some of the challenges? It's then, and it's here. All right, there you go. There's the help I'm giving you. Moving on. And remember, these are notes on a PowerPoint. You can pause and think all you want. All right. Problem number one, England. Let's see. Well, problem number one, excuse me, Germany, France, and England. Look at them. Are not that. Problem number one, or challenge number one, not problem, but challenge number one, Germany, France, and England are Germany, France, and England. They're not Rome. So what does that mean? How is getting the ideas of the Renaissance a challenge for them? So that's one. Two, Europe still had kings and queens who were not about to give up total control to the ideas of humanism and that all humans have value and that we're all important and it all matters. The idea of equality. So that's a challenge. Three, European society was not about to give this up right here. No, 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 no. No, that is sacrosanct, for to throw in a big fancy word. The importance of church in the everyday life was not going to be something to be like, no, it's not going to. Remember, the church owns so much land. Even after the Black Plague, they still own so much land. They still hold so much power because more people aren't rich than are. And more people who are in poverty need to have something that is always going to be there. And what's always going to be there? God is always going to be there to them. Now, problem number 4. And I helped you out a little bit a couple of slides ago. Here's one more little hint, and then we'll move on. Whoops. All right. For cultural diffusion to work, and that was the term I was talking about, because it is cultural diffusion for the ideas of the Renaissance to migrate north. I mean, how's it going to do it? It's going to do it through people moving, through merchants traveling, from ideas spread from books now. If this were taking place today, why would it be easier for us to recreate the glory of the past than it would be for people in England, France, Spain, and Germany to recreate the glory of ancient Rome? Why would it be easier for us today? Because that's ultimately why it took so long to get north. Did you figure it out yet? Just pause here and think for a second, and then you can move on when you're ready. This is what it is. Look, it's the 1400s. Okay, I can't just go outside and see Roman culture if I live in France, and there definitely wasn't any Google. The concept of an encyclopedia doesn't come about yet, as far as I know, until the Enlightenment. A guy named, I believe it was Diderot in French, comes up with the idea of an encyclopedia where you start putting information in a text for people. So as you can see, that was not in Mona Lisa's painting, and that was not in David's hand. So to get information from other places from the past was a challenge. So the ideas and the philosophies and the thinking and the art and all that stuff from ancient Greece and from ancient Rome just took a while. And because they're Europe, because they are culturally different, because they're not Europeans yet, they're French, they're German, they're Italian. What matters to each group is different, and how they view the world is different, and how they view, because remember, if you're in one of the Italian states, if you're in living with the Medici family, you live in Rome, and to you, Rome was everything. If you're living in Germany, Rome was a conqueror. Rome invaded you. Rome controlled you. So your view of Rome is different, and that matters. Bias matters. So their Renaissance is going to look different. So, did they have one? Yes, but their focus was on the everyman life, my life, your life, the life of every person. Okay, their focus of the Renaissance was how they could tell the story of the everyday man, of the common man. That's how their Renaissance was different, because again, their whole view of the influence of Rome, more so than Greece, but the influence of Rome is different because of how history played out for them. All right. Now, Northern Renaissance art is different. And without me telling you right away, I want to see if you can spot it. All right. Well, never mind. Very detailed as well, which is consistent with the other Renaissance art, especially the sculpture. More landscape and nature paintings are usually darker. The tones were darker. The tones were colder. So that's a big change. They're not glorious and great and all that kind of stuff, because, again, their lives, I guess they thought that their lives were darker. Their geography is colder. So why not? Oil. Oil on canvas is a big change, okay? Oil painting, using oil on canvas, not on walls, not on other things, but oil itself is going to allow for richer, deeper, fuller color. When you think about, kids today, I mean, you think about like watercolors versus your little paint caps. The colors are brighter, the colors are more vivid. So this is what they were doing in Europe. They were using oil-based paint. Paintings were less secular. So Northern Renaissance paintings were much more religious, much more power of God things, both positively and negatively, much more of the God in the landscape, God in all things, because the church was the constant. The church was the guiding principle because Rome wasn't there. And more scenes of daily life. Again, everyday things, not the Madonna, not great historical figures, not like in the School of Athens. All those people from the past were the focus of the art, whereas in Northern Renaissance art, it was the focus on you and me and the person, the everyday person. And that's a huge difference. It also makes it more approachable, makes it more relatable, makes it more understandable. Now, this is the wedding of Arnolfini. Very detailed, very detailed. Again, notice these colors are much more rich and fuller and vibrant than the Renaissance paintings. And if you need to, take a few ticks back. But I want you to notice, see this? That's actually the painting. This is all paint, but that's a painting of a mirror at the back of the room. And if you look really closely, you can see them in the mirror. Like, that's an amazing thing to take the time to do that. Here, let me move me so you can see this. I mean, look, there they are. And I mean, that's amazing. And there's the back of him, and there's the people there doing the wedding. That is so cool that you see the other people who are part of this wedding, the people who are basically looking at them in the painting, you can see them in the reflection. That is awesome. The next one here is, now they did, this is the Madonna. But also notice that this is on wood, so you get a whole different feel. But much more serious. Look at the face of the priest, much more serious. The angel over her. Again, much more religious. This is just part of the style back then. And Van Eyck, or Erck, is one of the most famous paintings of all time. Albrecht Dürer, he was a painter. This is his self-portrait. Again, not smiling, very dark. The clothing is different. There's more furs here, which makes sense because it's Northern Europe. Darker colors. Again, just a way of looking at things. This is a rabbit, and this goes back to the detail. Remember, I said that these artists were very detailed. I like his signature too. I like that there. I like his signature. But rabbit, and this is just oil. But look at the hair. Look at the face. Look at the whiskers. Look at, and also something else that I don't know if it's a byproduct of the time or the land or life, but that the rabbit looks miserable. Not a happy bunny. In fact, the author of these slides said, look at the face on that rabbit. Like, he's not a happy rabbit. And that's just amazing to me. But the detail is astonishing, and the rich and the browns and the multicolors. So that's kind of cool. And then finally, one of the most popular tattoos ever, or car stickers or T-shirt stickers, is actually a painting from Albrecht Dürer. Okay, this painting of the hands in prayer, again, showing you the importance of religion, but also showing you the detail in the hands. Those are a hardworking set of hands. That's not a rich person's hands. That's a pious person's hands. But just showing you that popular culture borrows from lots of things. This is cultural diffusion from way back. These hands are, it would not take it would not be too difficult for you to go see these hands on somebody or on the back of a car or a t-shirt or somewhere. But that's where they come from. This, again, showing you the focus of everyday life, right? This is just a peasant wedding. This is the everyday person. This is not a glorious wedding. This is not in a high priest in a high cathedral. This is not showing the glory of Greece or Rome. This is showing people celebrating a wedding of peasants. So the colors, vibrant, but not of the wealthy, not of a prince or a king, but of the everyday person, which is one of the focuses of Northern Renaissance art and of the writing of that time period. All right. Now, and to wrap it up, we're just going to look at a comparison of the medieval architecture and Renaissance architecture, just so you can kind of see finally how we move from one to the other. All right. Medieval architecture is your Gothic architecture. Yes, that's where Goth comes from. Props to the Cure, the grandfathers of Goth and Depeche Mode, and all those people who gave you Nine Inch Nails and then gave you emo. I'm sorry. Gothic architecture, as you look at it from the Middle Ages, it's very angular, it's very straight, up to heaven. That's the goal. Renaissance art, rounded, softer, much more appealing to the eye, some would say. Gothic architecture, let's say very large and very pointy. Not a whole lot of light in Gothic churches, which is why the stained glass windows were so important. The flying buttress was used to support, and this picture doesn't really show it. If you go find a painting of Notre Dame, you'll see these arms coming out from the sides of the churches. Those are technically called flying buttresses. And what they do, because all of this is stone. So what the flying buttress does is it takes all the weight and pulls it out off the top. It's a way to support the weight of all that stone and not have it come collapsing on the people in church. Stained glass told stories, like I told you earlier, for those who could not read, and just to give them a visual, because some of you learn better visually. Even back then, they knew people learned better visually, I guess. I don't know. But they knew they couldn't read, and they wanted to get the stories of the Bible up there so that they could take those with them when they went out into their daily life. Now, Renaissance buildings, the arch and the dome, those two great architectural inventions of the Greeks and the Romans, get brought back. Why not? We're bringing everything else back. We're in Italy. Let's bring back domes. Domes are cool. Again, qualities of Greek and Roman architecture: domes, columns. Oh, look. And frescoes, which are paintings on walls, paintings on ceilings. Big, big, big. That's the Renaissance. Big. Okay. Renaissance architecture versus medieval. Oh, here's what I was talking about. Yay, perfect. Okay, so here is Notre Dame in Paris. And by the way, a year ago yesterday, I believe it caught on fire. But you see these right here? These are flying buttresses, and they go from the building to the ground, and they basically take the weight and put it in the ground. They just transfer the weight in the ground, and they run all the way down the side of the church. This is, again, the dome, the columns. This is a very Renaissance-y piece of art. Okay, the dome in our Capitol building, Roman. Obviously, domes and arches are Roman. The Romans gave us the arch. Thank you. And then this is the El Duomo. This is Brunelleschi's dome. It's again a beautiful, beautiful church. Very Renaissance-y. He
lived in, these are some of his creations, his buildings. Filippo Brunelleschi's dome. And again, to understand scale, these are cars. That's how large that structure is. And these were built 500 years ago. That's amazing to me. And again, this is looking up at the ceiling inside the dome, and that's absolutely gorgeous. There's no other word. That's absolutely gorgeous. And if you don't like it, okay, but I don't know how you can't appreciate that. That is absolutely gorgeous. All right, folks. Brunelleschi commissioned to build the dome using unique concepts. He studied the ancient Pantheon. There it is, Pantheon in Rome. He studied the Pantheon in Rome right here, and he used it to build his dome. Again, every good student, every good artist is a good student. So he was commissioned, which means somebody paid him to build it. So if someone's going to pay you, it better be amazing, and I think it was. He used ribs for support. Inside the dome, he used the concept of ribs to hold that weight. Very, very smart. And that is the Renaissance. From its beginning stages to some of its important people to its trip north. It does make its way to England. Queen Elizabeth I was a Renaissance ruler. Where we go from here is exploration and the rise of the absolute ruler, and a little less influence in the power of the church, which you can kind of see how the Renaissance leads to some of that, because when you begin to understand yourself and when people begin to read, then you're free to interpret things on your own. You're free to understand and to question things, and you're free to figure out, is this the way my life should be? Is this the way God wants my life to be? Because God's not going away. The power of the church and the importance of God in these people's lives isn't going away anytime soon. Okay. But how they view God is different, and how they view their place with God is different, and how they view themselves as compared to others. When we begin to explore and go see people who look nothing like pasty white Europeans, what does it all mean? So I thank you for today. I thank you for this. There were a lot of slides, a lot of pictures, not a lot of writing, but take your time, write down what you need, and use this information to help you understand you just a little more. I'll see you tomorrow.